And we're live.
Hello.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello, all. Welcome. Thursday night, Generational Change live stream. I'm Jen.
I'm Peter, and I'm a lot taller than you right now.
I like it that way.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm happy. I like to feel lower in this. I like the table height. I'm strange that way. I like it the way I like it.
Well, we're doing the best we can here, but obviously our adjustment comes a little bit after our ridiculous travel excursion for the past 7 years.
So, yeah, we've had quite an ordeal over the past few days. That's for sure.
It's definitely been quite entertaining, to say the least. And everybody, please hit the like button. I'm putting that out there right now, and watch on YouTube. So, again, we were in Cleveland.
We were in Cleveland.
And obviously, it was not the result we were looking for.
No.
We really did all that we could to help Nina. My travel experience was even worse than Jen's.
We both it was bad, but his was really bad.
And this was just one of those circumstances where if it could go wrong, it did go wrong.
It was, you know what? It's almost like it was ominous from the very beginning. That's what it feels like. It feels like it was just an ominous thing.
Well, I kept on thinking that, at the end of the day, no matter how bad things ultimately got, that in the end, Nina was going to win. And that all these other things that were happening, you know what? It's all good. It doesn't matter. It really does come down to what actually took place in the district, not what took place nationally. Yeah, that's that.
I think you're right, John. I think you're right.
That's exactly the reason why. It's your fault, Jen.
It's all my fault.
Your fault that Nina didn't win.
If only Nina had come onto my Assange telethon, that would have made her win.
But
I'm sure that would have gone over better.
But we're gonna do something before we bring in our first guest, amazing friend of the show, Medea Benjamin, who has a lot to share with us and obviously knows our Congresswoman pretty well. Unfortunately, we really have to dive into this quickly.
We do. We need to. Well, we might have to come back to this later. I'm not sure. I have a lot of things to say about this.
Yeah, but this is definitely one of those
circumstances. All right, so we are doing story time, guys. We're going to start with story time.
Yes.
And today we are going to be reading Tale from, what is it? Les Miserables Crones, Tales of Entitled Bitter Women. Today we'll be reading an excerpt from there. So
yeah, this is a story that I really have to share. It's not a good one, but
no, it's unpleasant. This is an unpleasant truth, but we're going to have to read the story.
Once upon a time, there was an entitled...
Don't do it in that voice. Do it regular.
Bitter crone.
There you go.
So small and petty was she that she felt the need to come out of her lair and rear her ugly head to celebrate the misfortune of the most vulnerable villagers in the land. For the noblewoman who was fighting for the villagers was her nemesis. Years later... Years earlier. Sorry. I actually made a mistake. That doesn't happen.
Yes, you did. Go ahead. Continue.
Years earlier, the noblewoman had notified the village of the stench and evil ways of the crone. The crone looked at the misfortune of the villagers and announced the noblewoman was fighting for the villagers. She dared to speak of helping the people and standing up to Lord Oligarch. That could be a lot of people. Anyone working against the noblewoman is doing a mitzvah. The end.
Oh, where to start with this? I have so much to say about this. I mean, I think our tweet, what we responded last night was like a pretty accurate thing of how I feel. The fact that my Congresswoman felt the need to come out and insert her opinion about a race in Ohio, where we all know that it was just a spiteful screw you about Nina. And we know this. This is how small and petty she was. But the fact that she thinks, and for people who don't know what a mitzvah is a good deed done by religious duty. Okay? A good deed done by religious duty is a mitzvah. So in other words, what our Congresswoman is saying and she said this, that her quote was, after hearing Nina Turner speak last night, the people that supported the Chantel Brown were doing a mitzvah. So in other words, the people that are supporting the corporate bought tool of the establishment, that supporting that is a mitzvah. So what we suggested, and I hope, Debbie, if this ever gets back to you, I hope so. Debbie, you need to learn more about tzedakah than mitzvah. Because the fact that you think that supporting someone that is going to just toe the line and rubber stamp your corporate centrist nonsense and screw the people of Cleveland, you're just so mistaken if you think that's a mitzvah. There is nothing that's a mitzvah about that, my friend.
And it's one thing for her to celebrate Chantel Brown's victory, which I thought was pretty out of left field to begin with, because she rarely, if ever, sticks her nose into any of this stuff.
Right. She doesn't ever really get involved.
That's the thing about Debbie. She's very, as I like to say, she's very cunning in the way that she conducts herself politically. She has other people do that stuff for her, but she just couldn't help herself in this circumstance. She felt that she had to say, it is such a privilege to be working with Chantel Brown. And you would think that that alone was bad enough, but she just couldn't help herself.
She couldn't help her little petty self.
She had to stick it to Nina, because that's the person that Debbie is. And not only that, but she had to invoke this idea that it was divine intervention.
Well, and the fact that she had to tie it into Judaism, and the fact that that was a virtue signal, not only to the Jewish community, but to the Israeli lobbies and the PAC money, because that is what happened here. And so the fact that she even brought Judaism and made it be like some religious thing into this, it disgusts me to no end.
It's already being reported. I know a lot of people knee-jerked and suggested that it was the old black vote that ultimately cost Nina this
And I
race.
do think that's a big part of it.
It may have very well played a role, but everything that we are hearing is that the Jewish vote in East Cleveland is what made the difference in this election. And the amount of money that was spent by the AIPAC pro-Israel super PACs.
It wasn't AIPAC. It was the one, I forget the name of it, but the one, the Democratic, Israel Democratic something PAC. But that's who spent the most amount of money.
Right.
That's who was blanketing the airwaves with these ridiculous smear ads. And, you know, it makes me sad. And you know, my husband's family is from Beechwood. I've spent time there. I know the area. And it's upsetting to me that this is the cause of it. But ultimately what we have here is we have people that are being basically brainwashed by a lobby and voting against the interests of the people that live up the street from them in favor of this illusion of what they think they're supporting in Israel. And it's really upsetting to me, whether or not you like, I feel like we can talk about the Israel thing, and I know that pisses people off and we can argue about that, but that's kind of not the point. The point is that you're essentially prioritizing that over what's happening in your own backyard. And that really bothers me.
I think that that is actually a great transition into the first conversation of this evening, which will be with none other than Medea Benjamin, who happens to know Debbie Wasserman Schultz very well, and how she weaponizes these types of wedge issues for many people, very serious wedge issues for many people, into political gamesmanship, which is the worst kind of representation. It's all about you, and it's all about protecting your part of the, I guess what you would call the political establishment.
Right. She's just about protecting her seat. That's it. She's just about protecting her seat, clearly.
But the fact that she felt the need to basically, you know, you want to say piss on the grave, so to speak, that just goes to show the type of person that she is.
It really does. Because it's very telling.
Because if Nina had won, we would have been talking about Nina winning. We wouldn't have even mentioned Chantel Brown.
Not even at all.
Wouldn't have even been necessary.
No.
It would have been about celebrating and being happy. The people who are celebrating Nina losing, not Chantel winning.
Absolutely.
And that
is sick.
Is the privilege that is the privilege of the upper class liberals in this country who live and die by politics all day.
They're celebrating that the person won who is the person who's not going to help the people that need the help the most. They're celebrating.
And without further ado, we're going to bring in friend of the show, an amazing activist, obviously
co-founder of
CODEPINK, who has done an amazing job in regards to our foreign policy activism that we're desperately needed.
She's badass.
And certainly
if you ever get a chance, watch the video clip of Medea being carted off at the press conference or at the Senate.
Because Medea is a very violent person, mind you.
Well,
you know, she really is there to hurt people, let me say. And even though you weren't there when we were at the Assange event, your home is lovely, really had an amazing time.
Yes.
And of course, your couch that is Frida laden certainly was the cherry on the sundae.
Oh yeah, like I'm a huge Frida fan, so it was really cool.
And you are on mute right now, Medea, just letting you know. So welcome back.
Welcome back
to Generation.
Thank you so much, and I'm glad you're a Frida lover, because I am too.
Big time. If I don't want to mess with my setup, but if I turn my camera, I have the only framed picture on this wall is the Frida Vogue cover with the green background. Do you know the French Vogue cover that she did, the photo shoot? And I have that in this huge mat and frame, like it's the centerpiece on this wall.
Nice, wonderful.
So I'd wanted you to come on a while ago and talk a little bit about what happened when you were in Peru. If you think that is something that is still worthy of discussing, if it has changed at all, if it's something that we should talk about, then let's start there. Because I know it's been a while since you were there. So I wouldn't mind knowing an update on what's going on in South America.
Well, it's important to note that while the election took place almost 2 months ago, it was contested a la Bush. The same kind of tactics were used by the opponent to Pedro Castillo, Keiko Fujimori, to try to find anything, grasp at anything to say that there was fraud. And what she did was the exact same thing that Bush did, which was delay the inevitable. But it also created more divisions internally in Peru. It made some people feel that the new president isn't legitimate. I mean, it's very similar to what has happened here. But
Right.
what is really amazing in the case of Peru is that it is now has a president that is from the most humble background that you can imagine. This is a guy whose parents are illiterate, who comes from the countryside, who is a teacher for decades in a rural school. And he really represents the oppressed people of Peru that haven't been the recipients of the money that's been coming into the country from the sale of their resources, the mines. And that's why his program was so resonated so much with the people in the rural countryside, to say that we want to renegotiate these contracts that we have with the foreign mining companies. We don't want to kick them out. We want to make sure that the places where they're working are not the poorest places in the country, that a greater percentage of the profits stays in the country, and particularly in the locality where the mines are, those kinds of things. And so it's really quite beautiful that somebody with that background is now the head of Peru. And we'll see as things go, because he's facing a lot of opposition.
I was going to say, how long until we need to go in there and
Bring them freedom
and save the Peruvians from his evil socialist ways? And so how long until this becomes like the next, because that seems to be our MO. You know, you have countries that are trying to get it right, and we just don't agree with that, or we want their resources and whatever other military motivations, and then they're the problem. So we have to go fix that because he's the evil dictator. But before that, so is it over? It is
now over.
Okay.
He was a week ago officially declared the president of Peru, and the inauguration was very beautiful. But already the sharp teeth are out to bite around him, and they don't want to approve his cabinet, and the opposition is strong in the assembly. And one of the most important things, according to his program, something that is very common among progressive governments in Latin America, is to have a constituent assembly that is tasked in rewriting the Constitution, because the Constitution comes back from the days of the strong arm father of Keiko Fujimori, Alberto Fujimori, and it is written in favor of the multinationals, in favor of privatization. And so he thinks it's very important to rewrite that Constitution. Well, are you going to get this Congress to approve of a National Assembly to rewrite the Constitution? No way, unless the people come out in large numbers on the street and start demanding it. So it's going to be very exciting. And this is important for the rest of Latin America, because it is indicative of a turning of the tide towards progressives that are now governing in quite a number of places in Latin America, and hopefully will soon be in place in Brazil if Lula gets back in there. And wouldn't it be wonderful if there was a real change in Colombia to get a a progressive president there. You know, they call the Colombia the Israel of Latin America.
Yes.
And it's
Not a compliment.
It's not a compliment by any means, but it would be great if that could change as well. So, you know, there are a lot of positive things happening in Latin America. At the same time, let me just say that COVID is really raging throughout the continent. And you might remember some stories of bodies being out on the street in Peru, and how difficult it is to stop the spread. We had to wear double masks and a shield in the airport, on the planes, and double masks inside all of the interior spaces, restaurants and conferences. And people are very concerned about how they're going to address not only COVID, but the economic consequences of COVID.
What do you think would happen if a progressive government were to take over Colombia in regards to its proxy to Venezuela? Obviously, the interest in Venezuela is strictly based on the crude oil that's under their soil. Anybody who thinks otherwise is, again, not paying attention. But certainly, it's one of the scariest parts, I believe, of Biden's presidency. I do believe that he is much more and likely to be, or at least his administration, I should say, is likely to be more aggressive than Trump's administration. Where do you see things going in Venezuela? And then ultimately, where do you see things going in Cuba?
Wait, you can't just go like that.
Okay, so I won't go like that.
We have Cuba is its own conversation.
Fair enough. Okay. So let's start with Venezuela.
Stay on the
continent. Let's go there.
Well, one of the interesting things that came out today is there's going to be negotiations mediated by Mexico starting next week with Venezuela and a lot of the different opposition groups. So we're very excited about that. Biden maintains this ridiculous policy of continuing to recognize Juan Guaido, of keeping those sanctions in place that are so murderous. And we are hoping to work with Congress to write legislation that says that we cannot have sanctions that violate the Geneva Conventions, which are saying that sanctions like the one placed on Venezuela hurt the ordinary citizens, leading to mass deaths, massive numbers of people dying in Venezuela, and the massive migration we see. We don't think anything good will come from this administration, but we do think that inside Venezuela, people are really ready to see negotiations between the different political groups and a lifting of the sanctions.
Yeah, that's a great transition to Cuba.
Yeah, I mean, in Cuba, it's really, all of it though. It's like people are calling it an embargo. It's not an embargo. It's a blockade. And I think that it is an important distinction, because we're not at war with those countries. This is not an act of war. It's just us being us. I mean, it's a crime. It's a war crime, but you can't call it an embargo. That almost makes it legitimate. It's not. It's a blockade. But yeah, what's going on in Cuba has been going on obviously for a really long time. What is it you think that recently, what has been the recent situation where it's been like really coming to the surface again and you see this very much a divide, especially we see it in South Florida, and it does seem generational. This, like, the younger Cubans are not wanting the same thing is what it does seem like to me. I mean, what do you see this coming from, like this recent sort of like surge of this?
Well, let's look at the top 3 sources of revenue for the Cuban government. Amazingly, number 1 was sending health professionals around the world, as they've been doing for decades now. And many countries paid for those services, or sometimes it was the United Nations agencies or other vehicles. And that brought a lot of money into Cuba that was used for paying for the healthcare system. The second source of revenue was tourism, which had become a very big industry, especially when Obama lifted the restrictions and you saw these enormous cruise ships coming into the ports of Havana. The third major source of income is remittances, like it is for most countries, not only in Latin America, but all over the world, where people migrate from poorer countries to richer countries and send money home to their relatives. So these were the top 3 sources of income. Between COVID and sanctions, every one of them has been closed off. The US has strong-armed countries to send Cuban doctors packing. That was done under the Trump administration, and continues today to encourage countries not to accept help from Cuban doctors. Second one of tourism, the Cuban government had to close it down to try to stop the COVID spread. And the third, remittances, was stopped by the Trump administration, and then Biden hasn't done anything to change that. And so what you see is a bankrupt country. And so, of course, people don't want to stand on lines, endless lines to get food. They don't want to go into the pharmacy and find that they can't get aspirin. It's terrible. So they go out on the street. And while it's been manipulated to say these people don't want food, they don't want medicine, they don't want vaccines, they just want liberty. Come on, people want food, they want medicines, they want vaccines. And the number one way that we in the United States can help them is by lifting that blockade.
You know, that's an excellent point. And, you know, it's like, as you like to say, working backwards from your conclusions.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they blame all of those things. So all of those things you listed about people having to wait in lines and just not being able to get what they need, that is what they say. Oh, well, that's because they're communists. See what happens in the communist country? They have to wait in line for things. They don't just get the things. And it's like, we know that that's not what the issue is. I mean, whether or not they're communists, we could talk about whatever, but that's not what the source of the issue is as to why the people are suffering. So those two things are not connected. But
yeah, and then
can I also say, sorry, one other thing, just to recognize people are suffering all over the world.
yeah,
People are suffering in Latin America. I was recently in Bolivia, some of the poorest people that don't have food and that chew on coca leaves because that's all they had. In Peru, if you go out into the rural areas, people are suffering. People in Haiti, my goodness, talk about suffering. So it's terrible what's happening in Cuba, but you know what? Nobody's starving in Cuba. There is at least a ration book and the basics that keep people going. They want more and they deserve more. But let's put it in the context that all over the continent, there are unfortunately a lot of poor people who need a better diet, who need a better roof over their head, and in some places don't have any roof over their head, and who need health care.
yeah, and that's, of course, what it comes down to. I mean, you can have any argument you want in regards to whether you agree with the socialist/communist government that is in Cuba, but you can't have a legitimate conversation until you end the embargo and lift the sanctions. And there are people that we talk to down here who suggest that, well, no, you have to eliminate the government first, and then we'll take the sanctions away. It's just this. That's first of all, that's American exceptionalism. That's a privilege that you think you're entitled to basically determine the rights of another country. You know, because we're the world's police, even countries that are 90 miles from our most southern point. You know, that's again, that is the power of the corporate media. And you're seeing it right now because, again, we're in Florida. You're not far from here. You see, obviously, Wasserman Schultz, who basically still runs the Florida Democratic Party, being front and center with the Free Cuba movement.
Yeah.
Then you had Biden step in and say the same thing. And now you're seeing it from Val Demings. You're seeing it from Nikki Fried. They are running to be the next senator and governor of our state, respectively. And they're playing right into the GOP's hands, hook, line, and sinker, as far as I can see.
Absolutely. I mean, they are just disgusting. Their policies are to make people go hungry. And that is just unconscionable. And to see how the Democrats, like the ones that you mentioned, they somehow think that these right-wing Cuban Americans are going to start voting Democrat. They're not. They didn't vote for Biden, and they're not going to vote for Biden. And so why is he catering to those people? Why are those the voices that he's allowing into the White House? Why are those the people that are getting all of the play in the U.S. media, instead of people like our friend Carlos Lasso and the Puentes de Amor, Bridges of Love, who walked over 1,000 miles from Miami to Washington, D.C., just to meet with Congress and people in the administration, and found the doors shut in his face for the most part. And so it really is, Biden is now tightening the sanctions. And so he says, all right, we're going to put the sanctions on these individuals. And the right-wing Cuban Americans are saying, that's nothing. That's nothing. We know that that's just symbolic. Come on, give us more, give us more. And so what kind of cycle has Biden put himself into now? He can never win with these people. So we have got to do a lot more to demand that Biden listen to the voices of rationality. And I think the whole framing of this has to be Biden has taken the Trump playbook, and instead of following in the diplomatic path of Obama. The path of Obama led to a flowering of free enterprise, and that's what we're supposed to love, is free enterprise in Cuba. Cubans were better off, good relations with the United States. Everybody was happy except for a group of Cuban Americans in South Florida who will never be happy until they get to go back and take over everything in Cuba. But anyway, we've got to say, why is Biden following Trump's policy instead of Obama's?
Well, that's a great question. A lot of times, people want to shy away from whether or not the conversation that we end up having as it relates to, whether or not Biden is actually competent enough to be president. How would you compare Tony Blinken, who I have said on many occasions is actually the president, to Mike Pompeo? Is there really that much of a difference between the two men? One happens just to be extremely boorish, and Blinken happens to be more diplomatic, but they're still ending up at the same conclusions in terms of foreign policy, as far as we can see, if not worse.
Yeah, but I don't dismiss Biden the way you do. I think he knows a lot of what's going on. I think he has that idea of U.S. exceptionalism. In fact, he says that U.S. is going to be back at the head of the table now. He wants to manipulate the internal processes of other countries, and he is trying very hard to do that in Cuba. And in fact, he wants his legacy to be the president that finally overthrew the communist regime in Cuba, and he thinks that would keep Florida blue for decades to come. It is not only just not going to happen, it's also a kind of collective punishment against 11 million people. And I think we should recognize that people should have the right to get out on the street and protest in Cuba or anywhere else. Certainly, I believe that people should have that right. But we also have to recognize how our own government is manipulating this, not only with the sanctions that we've also talked about, but let's talk for a minute about all of the money that we are pouring into creating dissent on the island, into funding these groups, into creating our own little islands of, quote, civil society and pretending they are somehow independent from the United States. But it's our tax dollars, and there's $28 million going for that, as well as another $20 million going for Radio and TV Marti. Imagine if the tables were turned. Maybe Cuba, wouldn't have the money to invest that in overthrowing the U.S. government. But what if we knew that China or Russia was doing it? I mean, everybody would go crazy saying, look what they're doing. They're supporting regime change here in the United States, and be all outraged about it. But the U.S. has been getting away with this for so long. And the Biden administration is doing exactly the same thing now. And so it's very hard to distinguish between what is, quote, legitimate protest, which we all should support, and what is being manipulated by Cuban Americans. And boy, they have a lot of money, these regime change folks. We see them in Washington, D.C., staying at the fanciest hotels with their fancy rental cars, with their fancy equipment, and somebody is really footing the bill for a lot of the major protests that have been happening in Washington, D.C. and other places around the country. But I think it's important for us to recognize that we have got to get to not the ones in Southern Florida, because you live there, but they're not going to listen to us. we have to get the Democrats in other parts of the country. And I'm really happy that today the head of the Progressive Caucus, Pramila Jayapal, met with Carlos Lasso from Puentes de Amor. It was beautiful to see the picture of them smiling and hugging each other. It's important that we go to the rest of the country and say, do you think that Biden should be trying to strangle the Cuban people with economic warfare, or do you want normal relations with Cuba? And we know what the answer is. So let's shore up the other hundreds of Democratic Congress people, as well as Republicans. Let's not forget, there are a lot of places in the Midwest run by Republicans that want to have trade with Cuba. We might not like Tyson's frozen hormone-laden chicken. I certainly don't. But they have in the past been selling a lot of it to Cuba, just as they've been selling rice and beans and corn and all kinds of things. So there are plenty of groups that we can go to outside of the extremist Cuban Americans to say, let's put our policy back on a rational track.
Last thing, and I think this is a very important point that you just brought up about the Democratic Party basically aiding the war portion of the GOP. Obviously, we're familiar with the Free Cuba PAC and what they represent. They dominate funding for the GOP to have this regime change, not just in Cuba, but, you know, the whole concept of Latin America, and basically have it run by corporate special interests from the stateside. Here's the thing that I don't think it's talked about enough. The number one recipient of the Free Cuba PAC money is our Congresswoman, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I still think that she is...
Wait. But the next 9
are members of the GOP. So I still think that she is a major cog in this equation as to why we don't have normal relations with Cuba. One of the best things that Obama did do as president is have relations with Cuba. Yeah. And no one fought harder to prevent that than Debbie did. And now that Biden, who is much more of a hawk than Obama is, now it just becomes an even bigger proxy problem because she plays right into the hands of the GOP. And now you're seeing it with, as we stated before, candidates like Val Demings and Nikki Fried, because Debbie really does control not just the state party, but of course the infrastructure of South Florida when it comes to the Democratic vote. Last thing, from your perspective, how detrimental would you say that she is in regards to us actually being able to get to the table the right way with South Floridians, which seems to be the most important demo when it comes to this particular issue?
Well, she is absolutely key. In fact, she has a resolution now that we managed to stop from going to a vote on the House floor this past week. But she's going to bring it up for sure when they're back in session in September. It's House Resolution 534, and it's a resolution condemning the Cuban government, supporting the protesters, calling on our government, the Biden administration, to support the protesters, calling on the rest of the world to do that. Huh?
It doesn't end with her. It just doesn't end.
It doesn't end. And so she's going to be back with her resolution. And what we're trying to do during this August recess is go to all these other Congress people and say, don't let Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who is in bed with Marco Rubio, determine what U.S. policy is going to be vis-a-vis Cuba.
Well, we'd be very happy to help in any way we can with whatever your mission is there.
As Thomas McKelly just said, Medea-based. You are fantastic.
You know that's good, right, Medea? Because I know like you and I were a little older, but that's a good thing.
It definitely is. And we can't thank you enough for all the amazing work you do with CODEPINK. But as probably the most recognizable anti-war activists that we have, we will do anything we can to assist you in your efforts. And we certainly look forward to having you back on the podcast again really soon.
Thank you. It's been great being on with you. And I'm so glad to have you taken on Debbie Wasserman.
Well, we got, you know what? her nonsense is just, it's unbelievable.
And you know what? If you go back and check the beginning of the podcast, the fact that she threw Nina Turner under the bus.
No, Medea saw that. Yeah, she saw that.
It's just, but that's who she is. Yeah. That's who Debbie is. And unfortunately,
the miserable crone.
As it stands today, she's in control. But hopefully, if things break right in the near future, it won't be for long.
Yeah.
We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Medea.
Great. Nice being on with you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I mean,
Love
She's one of those
Medea.
people that just really makes you feel good.
I don't know. She's very threatening the way
She
attacked,
definitely
the way
is.
she attacked,
So
assaulted
much so that
Debbie.
so much so that Debbie had to do what Debbie does, and that's call the cops.
Karen Wasserman Schultz.
Debbie, again, for all the things that we talk about with Debbie and we joke about, but the one thing that isn't a joke is that Debbie does actually call the cops on people.
Yeah, no,
She actually does.
She called the Capitol Police on Medea Benjamin.
Yeah.
And said that she had assaulted her. Now, I don't know if anybody's seen Medea, like other than from here up, but
she's 90 pounds soaking wet.
Seriously,
she's 90 pounds soaking
and
wet.
it's just and a pacifist, mind you. But anyway,
we have to transition
yes.
to having a conversation with what I consider to be the complete opposite end of the spectrum when it comes to everything that Debbie represents, because Debbie represents everything that is wrong with America.
Well, we're going to be still talking about imperialism.
Yes,
it's still imperialism.
Debbie is at the front of the line when it comes to imperialism. And no, we are not the first.
No, it's really more that she's at the front of the line to collect the cash, and then she just does what they want her to do. That's what I think. But
the lack of value for our natural resources, for the things that do make America great, is an issue that doesn't get talked about enough. It's why we fight for universal health care. It's why you shouldn't put that up there.
So funny.
But
Sorry.
But the next guest we're going to bring into the studio is somebody who not only ran for president, but gave an amazingly inspiring TED Talk about the lack of American exceptionalism that needs to be more in the mainstream, because we're not exceptional. We're actually very detrimental.
Oh.
And that is a topic that needs to be discussed by somebody who is part of the first people of our nation.
Yeah.
And so without further ado,
like the first people to be subjected to American imperialism.
Yeah. The people who still should be recognized as our first citizens.
Well, that's a whole other,
So we are going to bring it to the studio. Mark Charles, welcome to Generational Change.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with both of you today. I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, listen, it's a real pleasure. And obviously, as I said, your TED Talk was really inspiring. And I just think not that necessarily, most Americans don't understand our past. It's that I think a lot of Americans want to forget our past. They don't want to admit that with much great power comes a great crime, or great wealth comes a great crime. And it is our original sin. And so even today, we desperately want to pretend like Native Americans don't have rights. You saw what happened at Standing Rock.
It's happening all the time.
But it's happening.
I think it happens all the time. I just think that some of them make the news, but most don't. That's what I think.
What inspired you to do the TED Talk, and what was the response you got from probably tens of thousands of people after the fact?
Yeah, thank you. Before we begin, let me just start by introducing myself. So
Absolutely.
Yes, please.
Yeah, Mark Charles Yinish, yeah. Sin Bakadina initially, the Tohiglini Bashas Chin, Sin Bakadina Dasha Chedo to the Cheatney Dasha Nella. In our Navajo culture, when we introduce ourselves, we always give our 4 clans. We're matrilineal as a people, with our identities come from our mother's mother. So my mother's mother is American of Dutch heritage, which is why I say Tsin Bakadina. Loosely translated, that means I'm from the wooden shoe people. My second clan, my father's mother, is Tohiglini, which is the waters that flow together. My third clan, my mother's father, is also Tsin Bakadina. And then my fourth clan, my father's father, is Todachitni, which is the Bitterwater clan. And that's one of the original clans of our Navajo people. I often introduce myself by saying I'm a dual citizen of the United States and the Navajo Nation. I moved where I live now in Washington, D.C. from the Navajo Nation about 6 years ago. And where I live now is the traditional lands of the Piscataway. So the Piscataway, they're the nation that were living here, hunting here, farming here, fishing here, right along the Potomac River, long before Columbus got lost at sea. Yes. And they're still here. And so I want to publicly acknowledge and thank them for their stewardship of these lands. And I want to state just how humbled I am to be living on the lands, on their lands today. So going back to the TED Talk, I have been, the framing of the TED Talk was around what's known as the Doctrine of Discovery, which is something that most people are not aware of. Very simply, the Doctrine of Discovery, it's a series of papal bulls edicts of the Catholic Church, written between 1452 and 1493. They say things like invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever, reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, convert them to his and their use and profit. It's essentially the church in Europe saying to the nations of Europe, wherever you go, whatever lands you find that are not ruled by white European Christian rulers, those people are subhuman and their lands are yours to take. In the book that I published, Unsettling Truths, I co-authored it with Soong-Chan Rah. The first sentence of the book is, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. You can colonize those lands, you can steal those lands, you can conquer those lands. You can't discover them unless your worldview leads you to conclude that the people who are already there are not fully human. And so this doctrine of discovery, it's a dehumanizing doctrine, and it's been embedded into the foundations of the nation. You can see it in our Declaration of Independence, you can see it in our Constitution, and you can see it in our Supreme Court case laws. So the TED Talk that I gave was about how this doctrine has been embedded into the foundations. I point out that the Declaration of Independence, 30 lines after the statement all men are created equal, refers to natives as merciless Indian savages. How the Constitution, which begins with the words "we the people," which sounds inclusive, Article 1, Section 2 never mentions women, specifically excludes natives, counts Africans as 3/5 of a person. Then in 1823, we had a Supreme Court case. It was Johnson versus McIntosh. Two men of European descent, they're litigating over a single piece of land. One claimed to have gotten the land from a native tribe. The other one said they got it from the government. They want to know who owned it. Who had the right to sell the land, the tribe or the government? The case goes all the way to the Supreme Court. The John Marshall Court, they had to decide the principle for land titles, and they rule that, first of all, the principle is based on discovery. And then they rule that even though natives were here first, but because we're savages, we are only occupants of the land, whereas Europeans have the right of discovery to the land, so therefore they have the fee title, so they're the true title holders. That case creates the legal precedent for land titles, and that precedent and the Doctrine of Discovery are referenced by the court in 1954, 1985, and most recently in 2005. I won't give the whole TED Talk away, but I go through that 2005 case fairly closely in that TED Talk and demonstrate that it is probably one of the most white supremacist Supreme Court opinions written in my lifetime, ultimately concluding that natives still do not have rights to our sovereign lands, and basically saying you're still savages. And that opinion was written and delivered by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so these are the challenges that we face as a country, is the racism, the sexism, and the white supremacy that we face. These are bipartisan values. When your land titles are based on a dehumanizing doctrine of discovery, the legal understanding that natives are savages, this literally makes white supremacy a bipartisan value. Yeah. And so my campaign, when I ran for president, was saying we have to address our foundations. We have to look at what we're built on if we want to fix the problems that we're facing, rather than just ousting one candidate or doing something with this law or maybe amending this piece of it. I'm saying, no, we have to go in and address our problems at a foundational level, which is something most Americans are not willing to do.
Oh, no, most Americans don't even know who their congressional representative is. So, trying to get them to want to sort of like rewrite everything from the beginning is going to way over their heads.
I think that facing our past is something that must be done. And that's why you're seeing, particularly in Texas, they're trying to suppress history, suppress reality in terms of what we have done.
They're wanting to not teach actual history as if we were teaching it so great in the first place. I didn't learn of the Tulsa massacre until like a few years ago. So bang up job you guys are doing on teaching history there. But that to me is like a major problem we have here in how we teach history. And I know that this is kind of like off a little bit, but I've been really following lately these things that have been going on in Canada with the First Peoples and the schools and the reprogramming and rehoming and this whole concept about like killing culture and stuff like that. And I feel fairly confident that probably happened left and right here. And I was wondering if that was something that you know about or can talk to, because obviously it makes sense to me that happened, but we certainly don't learn about it. And the only reason we know about it now is because First Peoples in Canada went and did all the research and dug it all up and found this. Otherwise, we still wouldn't know that this is going on.
Well, so what you have to understand are the stages of ethnic cleansing and genocide that took place across the nation, right? So in the 19th century, which is the century we call our century of expansion, the U.S. Congress literally awards 425 medals of honor to U.S. soldiers who participate in Indian massacres. So the massacre at Wounded Knee, which most people have heard of that massacre, the U.S. Congress awards 20 congressional medals of honor to the U.S. soldiers who participated in that massacre. And so through the 19th century, we are literally, as we're moving further west, ethnically cleansing the lands. And one of the worst perpetrators of ethnic cleansing and genocide is none other than Abraham Lincoln. In 1862, he signs the Pacific Railway Act and the a Settlement Act. The Settlement Act allows people to go west and settle land for 5 years. If they do so, they get 160 acres. The Pacific Railway Act provides the land and the resource to complete the transcontinental railway. Within 2.5 years of signing that bill, Abraham Lincoln has literally ethnically cleansed the states of Minnesota, Utah, Colorado, and the territory of New Mexico of Native peoples to make way for the tracks of the railway that are going towards San Francisco, Seattle, and Los Angeles, making him one of the most genocidal presidents in our nation's history.
I bet that's a tough pill to swallow for
no one wants to hear that. That's a very inconvenient truth.
There are
unsettling
chapters on Lincoln in our book because deconstructing his mythological legacy has to be done so completely. So not only was, I mean, if you read his speeches, Abraham Lincoln was a blatant white supremacist. There is a museum at the base of the Lincoln Memorial. In that museum,
we've been there.
It's the size of a small classroom.
Yeah.
And on each wall, there's plaques hanging with different parts of speeches or things he wrote and different parts of his legacy. And one wall is his thoughts on the Union. There's probably it's a marble plaque. It's about 4 feet tall, about 2.5 feet wide, etched in stone. It says, "My primary object in this struggle is not to save or destroy slavery, it's to preserve the Union. If I could save the Union without freeing a single slave, I would do it. If I could save by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that." There's a plaque that hangs at the Lincoln Memorial, literally stating, according to Lincoln, Black lives don't matter. And we're hanging it there.
Yeah.
But how many people actually go and read it?
Well, but this is what, even the people who read it, it doesn't strike them what he's actually saying.
Right.
And
he doesn't care one way or the other if blacks are subhuman or not. It doesn't matter to him. He just was going to try to end the Union.
He actually stated not only in the Lincoln Douglas debates, but in other speeches while he was president, that he absolutely believed in white supremacy. "I have no intention," he wrote, "of making voters or jurors of Negroes or allowing them to hold office or to intermarry." He said, "There's a physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two from living in terms of social and political equality. But as long as they must remain together, there has to be the position of superior and inferior. And I, as much as any other man," said Lincoln, "believe the superior position belongs to the white race."
What do you, in your opinion, feel has been an accurate, if not fair, depiction of the Native American history that we have? The knee jerk is to go to Dances with Wolves. I do think that was a great movie.
Oh my God, you're all Hollywood.
But I'm sure that you have pretty strong opinions, perhaps not just about that movie, but also the way Native Americans were depicted in Western films, the spaghetti Westerns for many years.
Horrible.
It's all about corporate propaganda in many respects.
Yeah.
How do you see that history?
I mean, so the nation doesn't know what to do with Native history because it literally is ethnic cleansing and genocide. Even the boarding schools that we're talking about with Canada, the purpose of those schools
is genocide.
The stated purpose of the schools was to kill the Indian to save the man.
Yeah.
So after the massacre at Wounded Knee in 1890, the United States of America was actually losing its stomach for outright genocide, but they still wanted our land. So Richard Pratt, who was an Army captain, proposed his idea of an Indian boarding school where the goal of the school was to kill the Indian but save the man. Let's forcibly assimilate them to our Western culture, strip them of their culture, their language, their heritage, their understanding of who they are, and let's make them look just like us, look and act and behave just like us. Children were taken from their homes forcibly, put into these military-style boarding schools, punished for speaking their languages, punished for practicing their culture. The stories I've heard, first person, of boarding school survivors.
Yeah, there's people that remember this. There's people alive that remember this.
What they endured, the abuse, emotional, physical, sexual, that they endured is gut-wrenching. And the last of these schools didn't close, even in the US, until the 1970s and 80s. I attended a school in New Mexico, Rehoboth Christian School, that was transitioning from being a boarding school to a day school. I graduated there in the 1980s, and it was transitioning. So I was there as a day school student. There were other students there as a boarding school students. Oftentimes, the experiences of the school were night and day different because they were there under the boarding school mentality. And so this is, you were talking earlier about American exceptionalism. One of the things that I've concluded, or that we write in our book, is American exceptionalism is the coping mechanism for a nation that doesn't want to deal with its genocidal past or its current racist reality. So in other words, we have to tell ourselves we're exceptional. We have to tell ourselves we have, not only are we superior than people, but we have a land covenant with the God of Abraham, which, if you read the Old Testament of the Bible, now gives you the right to commit genocide. And so this exceptionalism that we cling to is based in the lie of white supremacy. And we cling to it because if we are not exceptional, if we don't have a special relationship with the God of Abraham, if we don't have a superiority over everyone else, then we are just another ethnic cleansing, unjust colonial nation that has never been held accountable. And that thought is unfathomable to most.
No, yeah, that's like basically you undo everybody's like reality and
so
everything that they know
to this sense of exceptionalism. And that is one of the hardest things. And American exceptionalism, again, this is another bipartisan value. It goes so far. So there's another Native author who wrote a book about the Doctrine of Discovery. His name is Stephen Newcomb. His book is called Pagans in the Promised Land. And it's literally because in the Old Testament, when God, the God of Abraham, gave the people of Israel their promised land, his command to them was to literally ethnically cleanse it, to leave no man, no woman, no child, no animal left alive. It was divine genocide, ordained genocide.
Mark, can you speak to what I think is one of the most important topics to cover for people to truly understand the American genocide of Native Americans? Obviously, the mass graves that have been discovered of infants in Canada is nothing short of, the worst kind of genocide. But I think there's probably mass graves all over this country that people are just not aware of. If you could speak to your knowledge on the pillaging. I mean, I know a lot of people know about the Trail of Tears, and we'll get into Andrew Jackson, but I certainly would like to hear your take on that.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there are numerous mass graves because we did boarding schools just like they did in Canada. In fact, the idea was kind of birthed here. Canada then picked it up and began doing the same thing. But if you go to one of the original boarding schools, which is in Pennsylvania, the name of it is slipping my mind right now, but there actually is a graveyard there where you can see the Native children who attended that boarding school are buried. You can.
Why are there so many? But here's the thing: why are there so many dead children? Was there just at some point they decided, yeah, these schools aren't working, we just got to cut our losses, let's just kill everybody and leave? Like, it's strange that there's so many.
Abuse, lack of proper medical care. I mean, you name it. When you put young children in an oppressive, abusive, unloving environment, whether you kill them with a gun or a knife, or whether they die because of neglect and abuse and other injuries, this is what happens. And so again, this is the history. One of the goals I'm working towards is based on a quote that was used by George Erasmus, who is from the Dene people up in Canada. And he was writing about the truth and reconciliation up in Canada. And the quote that he used in his writing is, he said, where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. If you want to build community, he said, you have to start by creating a common memory. I love that quote.
No, it's great. We talk about that all the time. One of my biggest issues is that I feel that it's our job to make sure that we're not doing what has been done over and over again to get us to where this point is, and make sure that we're reporting and talking about the things that are happening right now as they're happening, and not letting people, whitewash things. That's our biggest problem here. And so we're trying to do that. That's why we have people like you on. We'd like to talk about these kinds of issues. But what you were just saying something else to me.
I wanted to ask you, because the most controversial president in our history, and I say most controversial because he's probably the most genocidal, but he also accomplished quite a bit. And I think that that's why it's been a whitewashed history, is of course President Jackson and his responsibility with, for the Trail of Tears, just a person who embodied the imagery of all natives are savages and they must all be killed. Or if they're not killed, they must all move as far west as can possibly be that I can't see them. He really was a mass murderer in every sense of the word. And, a lot of times people want to just look at him as a war hero, which he was in the War of 1812. But just because you had one component of your life that was considered endearing to this country, you cannot whitewash away the horrific nature in which he embodied his presidency. It was terrible what he did.
I would agree with that. And I would state, because it will actually be more convicting for more people, there is no difference between Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Jackson.
Thank you.
They were both just as genocidal, just as white supremacists. And actually what I would say is what made Abraham Lincoln more dangerous than Andrew Jackson, because right now it's kind of acceptable or even expected that most people will call out Andrew Jackson, just like we will call out the Confederate generals and the Confederacy, but we won't call out Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln, not only was he literally so we have the Trail of Tears for the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, those other nations. In New Mexico, we have what's called the Long Walk, where my people, the Navajo people and the Mescalero Apache, were in the same way that Andrew Jackson did. Abraham Lincoln rounded up our people, marched 10,000 of us down to Bosque Redondo, put us in essentially a death camp, where we remained in prison until Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. A quarter of our people died while imprisoned in that death camp. And
people don't know these things.
And even if you read Abraham Lincoln's Thanksgiving Day proclamation in November of 1863, and you compare that to the history of the prior year, Abraham Lincoln is calling for a day of Thanksgiving to thank God for the fruits of the genocide he had been committing in the prior 12 months. It's absolutely disgusting. And not only that, his legacy, the 13th Amendment, right? So he already stated he was a white supremacist. He already said he had no intention of making voters or jurors or Negroes or allowing them to hold office. He was even asked by Judge Stephen Douglas if he believed if the Declaration of Independence applied to Black people, and he said he didn't believe so. And so when he became president, he had a problem, which is he wanted to end chattel slavery, but he had no intention of treating Black people as equal. And he actually was looking for a way. In his inaugural address, the day of his inauguration, Congress passed what's called the Corwin Amendment. The Corwin Amendment was to try to keep the state from seceding from the Union, and it constitutionally protected slavery in the states where it already existed. Abraham Lincoln, in his inaugural address, voiced his support for that and personally sent letters to all the governors asking them to ratify that amendment. It never got ratified. So the 13th Amendment we did get is the one that doesn't actually abolish slavery, right? The 13th Amendment says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party has been duly convicted, shall exist. Abraham Lincoln didn't abolish slavery. He redefined and codified it under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system. And today, our criminal justice system incarcerates people of color. We incarcerate our citizens at the highest rate of any country in the world. And we incarcerate people of color at 3 to 5 times the rate we incarcerate white people. Abraham Lincoln gave us the tools we are using today to strip civil rights from people of color.
Yeah, it always made me wonder, because the worst president in our history is Andrew Johnson, and it never ceased to amaze me how Lincoln, who is regarded as our greatest president, was put on the ticket. It never really, they called it the unity ticket, but I mean, the things that Andrew Johnson did in regards to Reconstruction and how much devastation he did in such a short period of time to not just Black Americans, but Native Americans. Mm-hmm. I mean, we can talk about the fact that he was, I think, 1 vote away from being impeached, would have been the first impeached president at that time. But no one really talks about the fact that Lincoln did have him on his ticket. And I think that if Johnson was as bad as he was, did Lincoln really have that bad a judgment when it came to recognizing the people that were around him or the ideas that were being espoused?
See, you're still running with the understanding that Abraham Lincoln was a good guy.
Yeah, he can't get past this. He's not going to get past this.
I'm not saying that.
Abraham Lincoln was a blatant white supremacist.
Okay, so Mark, let me just tell you this. So over the summer, one of the books that I listened to, I do audiobooks, I cheat now, but anyway, was Margaret Kimberly's Prejudential. And I don't know if you're familiar with Margaret Kimberly, but she's a historian and she's an author, and she basically went through each president was a chapter, and each president, and she spoke from what was their effect on the Black community and African Americans, on slavery, on and where we were at any point in history. And it's really from that perspective. And once I listened to that, and I told him this, they're all horrible. I actually was holding out for Carter. I was really a holdout for Carter. I really thought, you know what? He's a good guy, right? He's a good guy. No. And now I do think he is actually post-presidency. I actually do think he's a good guy. But I mean, they all were so either white supremacist, racist, genocidal. I mean, like everything. And none of them stand out as not being that way.
One of the things I work very hard to do, I did this in my campaign, I do it in my writing, I do it in my speaking, is to help people understand the flaws of our nation are not because of an individual politician or because of a specific law. It's foundational and it's bipartisan. For an example, I know just the other day you've been talking a lot in your show about the For the People Act, right? Which is the response of the Democratic Congress to not only the gerrymandering, but also the suppressing of the vote that the Republicans are doing at the state level. And so the Democrats are responding at a national level with their For the People Act. Now, you have to understand the difference between the Democratic and Republican Party is the difference between explicit and implicit.
Yeah.
So the Democrats are explicit, or the Republicans are explicitly racist, sexist, and white supremacists, and the Democrats are implicitly racist, sexist, and white supremacists. The Republicans, their party's not really growing. They have a very exclusive message, and so they are afraid of voters. They're terrified of voters. So the more people who vote, the less likely they are to win. So they are trying to suppress the vote. Democrats, who have a much more diverse base, but they continue to nominate white landowning men from the 1%, They're afraid once they nominate those people that their base is going to wander. So they're terrified of competition. So yes, the Republican Party has been trying to suppress the vote at the state level. They've been doing it for a while now, and the Democrats are responding, and I agree it needs to be responded to. But if you read the For the People Act, there was an amendment, or there was in the law that was passed in the 70s when they were doing the voting reform legislation after the Civil Rights Movement. They passed, one of the laws they passed was that a law that said the two parties, the national parties, could donate 2 cents for every age eligible voter in the country. So anyone over 18 eligible to vote, they could donate 2 cents to their general election nominee for their candidacy, and that they could give or they could expend on behalf of them directly. So in 2020, that meant the Republicans and the Democrats could give approximately $5 million to Donald Trump and Joe Biden. The For the People Act amends that section and raises that limit to a flat $100 million. So now, if that passes in 2024, the Democrats and the Republicans will be able to donate an additional $100 million directly to their two-party candidates, which will only work to further mute or even suppress the voice of third-party independent candidates. And so the challenge is both parties are opposed to true democracy. We tend to, there's the narrative out there that the general bias of the nation is the Republicans are bad, the Democrats are good. But both of them work together to maintain the status quo. And the status quo is based on racism, sexism, and white supremacy. This is what's written into our foundations. And so the biggest challenge, the biggest lie that we're told is that there is a villain and a hero in our
people like
system.
that. People like that.
People like
not.
Yeah. And
both sides
100%.
are complicit and have blood on their hands and are not willing to acknowledge it.
And what we talk about and what I've addressed when it comes to the For the People Act, yes, voting rights is important. But if you are not going to address voting rights in primaries, then I don't need to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you are still trying to maintain the system. You're just trying to fight the other side who's fighting back at you. This isn't actually about empowering people's right to vote.
No.
This is about maintaining the status quo for your side.
It's about maintaining the duopoly.
The only policy that the Biden administration has pushed that we are huge advocates for is the PRO Act. And the reason for that is because it's an economic policy that would alleviate the right to work laws in the state of Florida.
Which we need.
Which makes collective bargaining basically impossible.
Yeah.
They don't call it collective bargaining, they call it collective begging.
Yeah.
Because that's
right.
what
So it's really bad here.
And so where that is not an absolute good, but it's a very good bill, that is something that is on the back burner. Now, why would a bill that would actually be very good for tens of millions of people economically be taking a back seat to a very hyper-partisan voting rights bill? Because this is a corrupted system. It is a two-party duopoly that could change, but people are not going about it the right way.
Well, they like their political theater. They don't want to change. They like it exactly as it is. That's the whole point.
Bingo. And so having you here today really sheds a very bright light.
Yeah, now we all hate Abraham Lincoln again. And it's okay.
And I do think that there is something to be said for, circumstance, the time period and everything that was going on and the fact that bondage was legal. But again, we do have a very dark history, and trying to whitewash it, as is our tendency to do, is what leads to, I think, so much of societal backlash when they hear the truth. No, that can't possibly be true. We gave them freedom. We gave the natives casino land.
Yeah.
It's so interesting how that comes about. And Mark, where I want to wind this conversation down, I think is probably where a lot of the Native American history at its worst really came to the forefront was during Standing Rock. I don't think people really understand what went on in the Dakotas. We saw footage of the white working class, because that's what it was, the white working class marching in the street on behalf of the what's the name of the God? How am I
Dakota
forgetting the name of
Access
the
Pipeline.
The Dakota Access Pipeline. And when people said you're marching on Native American protected land, they said, to hell with their land. We want our pipeline.
Oh my God.
Need I say more? And would love to hear your feedback, because I really think that crystallizes it in a nutshell.
I think that was just what
Yeah.
made more people see it. It's been happening forever.
But most people don't want to see
That's
it.
true.
They don't want to know
That
it's
one was
going
the one
on.
that everyone saw. Yeah.
Everybody, and Mark, just like we like to say, we are heavy advocates for the environment, which is a true, that is a native quality that matters so very much to us. The value of land, the value of water,
Yeah.
the value of humanity is something that we hold very near and dear. And yet it seems that we're at a point now where the whitewashing of history is so important, because people don't actually want to see the things that go on.
Right.
People don't have a problem with fracking as long as it's not in their backyard.
Right.
But you better believe if it was in their backyard, they'd have a pretty
so
big
they want to
problem
stick
with
it on the property that isn't theirs.
And if that's not white
Yeah.
supremacy,
Right.
I don't know what is.
So let me try and reframe this whole dialogue for you a little bit. When I moved, I grew up off the reservation in a border town, and I moved with my family back onto the reservation about 17 years ago. We lived for 3 years in a very remote section, 6 miles off the nearest paved road on a dirt road, no running water, no electricity, lived in a one-room Hogan with a dirt floor. Our neighbors were rug weavers and shepherds. And while I was there, we were there just to live. We weren't there doing any sort of project or anything else. We were just there to be among my people. And as I was there and experiencing the intense marginalization of the reservation lands, as well as learning the history of the Doctrine of Discovery and seeing very clearly what had been done over the past 250 years, I found myself becoming not only insecure, but even very angry. And every time I would try to talk through it and make sense of it, especially with my non-native friends, I could feel this anger kind of coming up in me, and I'd have to eventually hang up the phone because I didn't want to start yelling at my friends. So I tried to temper myself. I tried to talk about it like I read it in the newspaper so I could stay in the dialogue longer, but then they would get defensive. Well, we didn't do that to your people. It wasn't my fault. And so therefore they would drop out of the conversation. And I couldn't figure out how to frame the dialogue in a way that let me state what I wanted to state and keep them engaged in the conversation. And one day I was writing a letter to my friends, trying this like the 10th time to get them to understand what I was experiencing. And I said, being Native American and living on a reservation in the middle of the United States, it feels like our native peoples are this old grandmother who has a very large and a very beautiful house. And years ago, some people came into our house and they violently locked us upstairs in the bedroom. Today, our house is full of people. They're sitting on our furniture. They're eating our food. They're having a party inside our house. Now, they've come upstairs and they've unlocked the door to our bedroom, but it's much later. We're tired, we're old, we're weak, we're sick, so we can't or we don't come out. But the thing that hurts us the most, that causes us the most pain, is that virtually nobody from this party ever comes upstairs, seeks out the grandmother in the bedroom, sits down next to her on the bed, takes her hand, and simply says, thank you. Thank you for letting us be in your house. I wrote that, and that's it. That's how I'm feeling. I started sharing that with people around me. Other natives would say, I've lived here most of my life, and I've struggled to know how to articulate how it feels, and you're hitting the nail on the head. I shared that with non-natives, and instead of getting defensive, they would come and say, how do we say thank you? How do we express gratitude to the indigenous hosts of these lands? What I think that metaphor does is it helps understand the root of the problem, which is we have a reversal of roles. We have a nation comprised of 300 plus million undocumented immigrants, mostly from Europe. People who've come here, they've never asked for, nor have they given permission to be here. And they're living here like one might live in a hotel room. Meanwhile, you have the indigenous peoples, about 6 million of us, who've been pushed aside and marginalized to these small spaces on reservations, and we're being treated like unwanted guests in someone else's house. We need our nation if we're going to truly move forward. And I believe we have to. One of my primary goals is a national dialogue on race, gender, and class, a conversation on par with the Truth and the Reconciliation Commissions that happened in South Africa and Rwanda and in Canada. But I wouldn't call ours Truth and Reconciliation, because reconciliation implies there was a previous harmony. I would say truth and conciliation.
I
And
was
one of the
gonna
things
ask
I
you that.
truly believe is we have to reverse these roles. We need this nation of literal undocumented immigrants to understand they are guests in someone else's house. And we need our native peoples to understand and step into our role as the host peoples of these lands. And that's what I saw happening at Standing Rock. We saw tens of thousands of native peoples from hundreds of tribes. It was absolutely unprecedented in the history of Turtle Island that we came together committed to the teachings of our elders, committed to peaceful protest, committed to prayer and ceremony, and we tried to tell our colonizers that you can't drink oil and water is life. Yes, we lost the court case. Yes, we lost much of that battle. But as far as us as Native people stepping into our role as the host peoples of the land, it was an absolute success, and it terrified this nation.
I have a question for you, though. Do you have something like in particular? Because I have like a question that I've been kind of formulating that I think
just the last thing that I was going to say is ultimately Standing Rock was a major victory because they have given up on the pipeline. They know that it's just not economically feasible. And I think the response from a lot of white America at Standing Rock, I think really gives a lot of the Native communities hope that maybe there is a bright future ahead, that maybe people really are starting to wake up and recognize that what happened here could very well be the reverse of the Trail of Tears. Maybe this is our opportunity to actually have a United States of America. It starts almost out of nowhere, even in the darkest moments, but people recognizing, millions of people recognizing that this was wrong and it should never happen again, is why I think it sets great precedent for the future when they attempt to do these pipelines, and they will try to continue doing them.
they do.
But I do think that there are people who are now starting to recognize that we do have to evolve, we do have to move on, and clean energy that protects our earth, protects our water, and protects our people is right there for the taking. It's right there for us to use. There's no excuse for us not to use it. And now more than ever, having that ability to come together, considering the unmitigating damage that we have done to this planet and seeing in real time the effects of climate change, runaway climate change, is very real and it's very scary. And unfortunately, a lot of people need to get scared before they act. But at least they're starting to act, and hopefully that precedent is set. And Jen, if you have any final
Well, no,
thoughts
you
or
wanted
questions.
Mark. What were you going to say?
No, I'll hold off. Go ahead and say what you want
Okay,
to say.
so my question to you is, and I believe this very much. This is kind of like where I get a little bit like hippy dippy, I guess. But like, I do not think that, and I've said this before regarding reparations to descendants of American slaves, that we cannot go forward without reparations. And so what my question to you is from your perspective and from the maybe, you know, what you would think would be in the best interest of First Peoples, what would reparations look like to you at this time? Because obviously just everybody sending thank you cards isn't going to really cut it. So like,
No.
what is reparations? Because we need to, that's where we need to start, I think.
So in regards to reparations, the challenge with reparations and the most clear talk about reparations is regarding to our nation's history with the enslavement of African people.
Yes.
However, we haven't abolished slavery yet. So if we allow this country to pay the fine for slavery before we actually abolish it, we're never going to abolish it, right? If a corporation is in a civil class lawsuit, right, a class action lawsuit, and they settle, and they have to pay their fine, and you get a piece of that settlement. Before you get your settlement, you have to sign a waiver saying you waive your right to litigate this issue further, right? That's how it works. So if we allow our country to pay the fine for slavery before we actually abolish it, we're never going to abolish it. So reparations, I agree, need to be paid.
Yeah.
But first, we have to actually abolish slavery and make it illegal, period. No clause keeping it legal in prison. Now, with natives, right, one of the issue, then this is the reason why the issue of reparations never comes up with natives, because you can, if you reduce the oppression of African people down to merely the theft of labor, you can almost come up with a very large number of what reparations might need to be. How do you pay reparations for the ethnic cleansing of a continent and the stealing of an entire landmass?
You can't. I guess what I'm talking about is what do we do? Like, what do we do from where we are now to best serve the community?
Again, so here's the challenge, right? So after the United States of America stole the Black Hills from the Lakota people, and then they carved the face of their genocidal presidents into them, they felt kind of bad, and they came back and said, hey, we probably shouldn't have done that. We'd like to pay you for those lands. And the Lakota said something very instructional to our nation, which is they're not for sale. You can't pay us for them. There's literally $1 billion sitting in a trust fund that they're not touching because their lands are not for sale. And the nation has no desire to give them back. The U.S. doesn't. So that money's just sitting there. One of the challenges we have is because land titles, the title to your house, the title to your office, the title for your state to be created is based on the legal argument that natives are savages. And so until we deal with land titles, our nation will never be able to acknowledge and change its injustice in the past.
So how do we do that? What do we do to do that?
This is why my primary plank of my campaign, my platform, was we need a national dialogue on race, gender, and class on par with the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that happened in South Africa, Rwanda, and Canada. But we have to learn from them, right? Because it's 25 years after the TRC in South America, in South Africa. And because, yes, they wrote a new constitution. Yes, they did a lot of really good apologizing and storytelling. But because they didn't change the underlying economic system, it's now 25 years later and people are saying, well, nothing's changed. So we have to address land titles. And this is why most people heard nothing about my campaign during the 2020 campaign, because that was one of my primary planks. And the reason you didn't hear about me is not because I wasn't on stage. I actually got screen time, or I actually got stage time with almost all of the candidates at different points throughout the campaign. The press refused to cover me.
Interesting.
The parties refused to acknowledge me. I literally was written out of stories where I was on the same stage as the other candidates.
That's so interesting.
And it's because nobody, and I can't emphasize this enough, nobody wants to have a dialogue that puts the title to their house at risk.
And how would that work? Like, that's what I'm trying to understand. How would that work?
I can't answer that right now, because if I answer that question for you right now, right, the entire debate will become about my proposal and not about the fact that we have to first deal with this injustice. And I don't speak for all Native peoples. I don't speak for every tribe. I don't even speak solely for my own tribe. And so this is why we need to have this dialogue. But until the nation is ready to have a dialogue and say we can put land titles on the table, nothing's going to change. This is the problem we're facing. And this is why it was so disheartening after 8 years of Donald Trump that we elected another white landowning male from the 1%, who, if Donald Trump said, make America great again, what did Joe Biden say? Let's restore the soul of the nation.
It's basically the same.
They're saying the same thing, the exact same thing. Hillary Clinton said, America's already great.
That's even worse.
God.
And so this is the problem, right? Joe Biden he said in the past, the road to equality is long and arduous. Do you know why it's long and arduous? It's not because people of color don't understand our own agency. It's not because we're not capable of sitting at the table and playing our part. The reason the road to equality is long is because white landowning men don't want to give up their positions.
You could say that again.
Yeah.
That's why it's long.
Yeah.
And that's how Joe Biden got elected. His wife, right, during the primary, she said out loud, my husband may not be as good on the issues as your candidate. Talking to one of the most diverse pools of candidates in Democratic primary history. LGBTQIA, women, people of color. She said, my husband may not be as good on the issues as your candidate, but in the end, you have to think about who's going to win. Well, it's the white landowning male who's going to win. And so, again, this is what's so challenging about our system is the two-party system works in conjunction to maintain the status quo. And we continue to believe that, well, maybe if we do it one more time, things are going to change. And that's absolutely false. They're not going to change. This is why I ran as an independent in 2020. I had no desire to even pull a Bernie Sanders and try to take over a Donald Trump and try to take over one of the two major parties. I was convinced the best way for me to actually, people said, well, if you run as an independent, you're just running a protest campaign. No, if I was running a protest campaign, I would run as a Democrat. I would have raised more money. I would have gotten some of the primaries. I never would have been nominated, but I definitely would have had my voice heard more. Running as an independent at least gave me a sliver of a chance of actually making a difference in this election.
Well, I think it'll be very interesting to see what roads end up getting taken, but I do think a lot of people are desperate for that change. And I think having, your message come to light, and we are always happy, to do what we can to lift up voices like yours is exceptionally important to us because it's the issues. That's what it's about. That's why we do what we do. When, if we get a lot of clicks, if we get a lot of subscribers, that's wonderful. But to us, this issue and these issues in general are extremely important, and uplifting our first citizens is very important to me. It's very important to you.
They're first peoples.
First peoples. Well, we could say citizens, but
no.
Okay, so first peoples.
And it's you know what it is. It's people that are vulnerable peoples now that shouldn't be vulnerable if for no other reason as to we've made them vulnerable. But it's just like I feel like, it's just this never ending job to just try to help people. And it's like fighting with people to try to help people. It's the most ridiculous thing ever. Like it's so frustrating.
I think we've learned a lot this evening, and
I did.
We certainly will be in touch. Mark, if you can let everybody know if there's anything you're working on right now.
He's got his book. Let's pull up, hold up the book, put the name.
Yeah. So
Unsettling Truths.
The book I co-authored, Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery. If you are tired with the debate over white Christian nationalism that's going on in our country, this book is a flat out rebuke of the evangelical church. It is a flat out rebuke of the church. And it calls out much of the buried history of our nation, and it lays out the challenges we're facing and what we need to do to move forward. I encourage people. And you can actually buy signed copies of my book on my website, which is wirelesshogan.com. If you just go to that wirelesshogan.com, on that front page, there's a link.
What's the word after wireless? Spell that.
Wireless Hogan, Hogan.
Okay.
WIRELESSHOGAN.com.
Okay.
And they can purchase signed copies of my book on that page.
Cool.
And Wireless Hogan is my username on most social media. It's my YouTube, it's my Twitter, it's my Instagram.
Okay, more important question. Did you do an audiobook?
Yes, we have an audiobook.
Okay,
We have
so
an
there you go.
ebook.
So now I'm in. I've become so incredibly like I feel bad about it. Like, do I still get to say I'm reading? Does it count as reading? If
Sort of.
well, because I asked my dad, I'm like, does it count as reading? He's like, no. I'm like, well, but I feel like, and by the way, I really only do it for nonfiction books, and really only prefer when it's the author doing it, because really for me, I'm just getting a private lecture. But Mark, can I call that reading? If I do it, does it count?
I haven't settled that question in my own mind right now.
Okay,
either,
so you hear what I'm saying? It's a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
But yeah, I didn't do the reading for the audiobook for ours. There was another person who did the reading.
Okay, see, now I won't. See, now I don't. Now I have to read it.
But yeah, we cover a lot of issues in that book. There's huge sections on American exceptionalism and the underpinnings to that, and the challenges that raises for our nation. So yeah, I highly encourage people, if you're able to get a copy of it. You can buy it almost anywhere. It got a starred review on Publishers Weekly. It's won a couple awards. You can get a signed copy on my website, but you can also get it pretty much anywhere else online you're looking for books.
All right, guys, check it out. And the truth is, I'm going to tell you, they are very unsettling. It's a very good title. It's we had an inconvenient truth, and that was inconvenient.
Yeah.
But this is very unsettling.
You're being read to, not reading.
Okay.
All
right. But I feel like I'm getting smarter.
There you go.
Can I add to the comments in the chat, or I put into the private chat? Is there a way to do it in the live chat?
Yeah, why not? Can't you?
I think so. Yeah, if you want to respond,
I don't know.
Absolutely can.
Does it let you? I've never had a guest ask about it, so I don't know what it looks like on your end.
I put something in the private chat.
I see it. Yeah, so we can.
I don't know how to
that.
put it into the live chat though.
I don't know. We can though. We're gonna copy it and put it in live chat.
Yeah, so we'll get that in there right now. And again, Mr. Charles, we really appreciate you coming on the podcast this evening. Obviously, as we stated, it's been very informative, and it's always great to learn new things about our history, even if it's hard to hear. But guys, we just put the link in the chat to get signed copies. So definitely check it out, guys. Again, Mark Charles of the Navajo Nation ran for president in 2020. His book is Unsettling Truths. We hope you'll pick it up. And thank you for coming on Generational Change this evening.
Thank you so
very much. It was great to be with you tonight. Hope you have a good evening.
Pleasure, Mark. Same to you, sir. Bye-bye. So as you can imagine, this has been
very unsettling.
No, it's not just that it's unsettling, but I don't get unsettled because I'm not surprised. It's not surprising when I hear what I hear.
It's not surprising to me. It's just it feels crappy. It feels crappy, and it needs to. Like, we need to sit with that. I feel like we need to sit with that crappy feeling. I've been doing a lot of like history stuff lately. I mean, I did Margaret's book, and then I did Daniel Scherzen's book, who was on our show, called True History of the United States. And that certainly wasn't a pretty picture. So I have this idea, and I said it when Danny came on, that we need to be having like almost history recertifications in this country, where every 10 years people have to go through history in order to be able to live.
I think because of what has happened, because of what has happened with places like Standing Rock, you're seeing the desire to try to whitewash history even harder now. That's becoming more and more of the common theme is, well, let's just rewrite the history books. Only we're not going to let anybody know about what was really going on.
But worse than that, we're doing it now. When we're seeing all the censorship and all the people not being able to see sides, people that don't realize that all they're watching is corporate media, we're seeing that now. So I always wondered, how is it that I got to this point and I only recently learned about the Tulsa Massacre? Who took that out of the books? Who decided not to tell that story? So we're seeing it happen in live real time now with so many other issues where we see the media not covering things that are really important. For example, Flint, Michigan. There are things that are going on, the housing crisis, catastrophes that are going on all over the place, and we're not getting this information. So why would we think it would then be put in a history book? It won't be put in the history books. And that basically keeps us from ever learning anything from our mistakes, because each generation is born without knowing like the majority of mistakes that were made before. I mean, it's We're watching it happen in lifetime. This is one of the key reasons why I am so vehemently opposed to censorship.
Well, and this is a great segue to our final chapter of the night, which is, of course, News and Amuse on Thursday. And look, they are trying desperately to censor. I don't even know if censoring is necessarily the way that you would describe it, but what Cori Bush has accomplished or has done already in regards to her protest, I think it speaks to a greater truth here, which is when regular people protest, they're regarded as agitators. But when an actual person who can pull the levers of power is protesting, that goes pretty far.
Well, apparently it worked.
It did. And for those people who were throwing shade at Cori Bush, shade on you.
Here's what I would say to people throwing shade at Cori Bush. Until you're willing and can do it to her in person, because that I would love to see. Until you will go.
Oh, they tried to do it in person.
Oh, anybody who wants to criticize Cori, please, by all means, try doing it, having a conversation with her and see how far that'll get you. She is so real. I can't even say this enough. I said it the other night, a couple nights ago. We're going to talk about Nina's election, but this is what I was speaking with on Status Quo. It's like people want to go after Cori. She is one of the most real fighters that we've ever had. She's the only person in there that isn't wealthy. She's the most real, from the streets, speaks for her people person that you could possibly ever have in Congress, given the way it is right now, ever.
And she is dangerous to the establishment, extremely dangerous, because she's the type of person that could rally the black vote in a way where they basically become empowered.
Yes.
Where they actually think, yeah, maybe we should withhold our vote.
Look, there's a difference. There's a difference in the black community. You've got people like Jim Clyburn. Okay. And yes, he will rally votes one way. He will. But Cori Bush speaks for the streets. And that is a whole different crowd and a whole different thing. And
Jim Clyburn is over 40, maybe 45 years older than Cori. So there really is a massive generational divide here with who the real voices of the black community need to be.
Well, look, the black community is not a monolith.
No.
Okay. There are all levels.
But there are those who we know who are working in their best interests and the ones who are working against them.
That's true. Cori Bush is working in the best interest of justice. Justice.
Yeah.
That's what she's all about, is justice. So, and there's people obviously that have a different definition of justice than we do.
Sure.
But she's all about representing her people, her community, where she's from, her people.
And it is a shame because the person who really was going to take the next step was Nina Turner. And it is a shame that she did not win her election. Now, we're not going to draw any conclusions right now.
We're not going to get into the details about the campaign itself.
But we do know that the overwhelming corporate special interest money that was spent in very specific ways, whether it was in the black community, portraying her as somebody who wasn't a real Democrat and was not literally bending the knee at the altar of St. Biden.
Well, in fact, the ads, all that they said about Chantel, the only thing that they said about Chantel is that she'll back up Biden.
That's it.
That's her only characteristic, is that she'll rubber stamp whatever they want. That was their ad. That was all they could even say about her.
And then on the other side of the district were the ads portraying Nina as anti-Israel. And that worked very well on this very affluent part of East Cleveland that Jen knows pretty well. And the problem with affluent Jews, they vote.
They do.
And they vote in mass.
They do.
And if the word gets around that somebody isn't towing the line in a way that is suitable to their liking, they will get out there and they will vote. And let me tell you, a lot of them are very prejudiced too. They are. And there was a lot of prejudice against Nina. This had nothing to do with whether Chantel was going to be a great representative of the Jewish community. The corporate Democratic establishment said that Chantel would be a great representative of the Jewish community. So by lockstep, they decided to go with what she said. With that said, Nina's campaign clearly made mistakes. We don't know all of them at this moment.
We don't
so
know
we're
the
not-
details, and the little
Yep.
bit that we do know was not like, it was sort of off the record. So we're not going to get into the details of the strategic logistical components of the campaign, where they went wrong, where we think they went wrong, where they know they went wrong. We're not going to get into that right now. That's a whole other, we'll do a post-mortem maybe at some point when it's not as raw.
But if you think you've heard the last of Nina Turner and the movement that she is without question one of the leaders of, I don't know what you're smoking, but this loss didn't make people sad.
Not at all.
This loss pissed people off.
Big time. I was in the room. I can attest to that. People weren't sad. They were furious.
Yeah. That's the next stage. A lot of people in the early stages of being in the political movements, when they get their heart ripped out, they tend to get very sad and depressed. And we saw that with Bernie. This was completely different from what I saw.
Oh, yeah.
This was like, oh, that's how you want it? Oh, we're coming.
Okay.
Oh, we're coming back. And we'll be twice as hard on you next time. And that's what's going to happen, because the only thing that the establishment, the status quo has is money, power, and fear. That's it. They don't have any real strategy. They just know how to scare the living bejesus out of people.
But let's be very clear. This was never about electing Chantel Brown. They could have found anybody to stick in that position, just like a manufactured candidate, doesn't matter, party drone, tool, whatever. This was only about beating Nina Turner. That's it. That's all they did. They invested all of their money to beat Nina Turner. They didn't bring anything new. They have no ideas. They have no platform. They stand for nothing.
Elvira,
she's vapid.
Elvira, I know you're a supporter of the show. I'm going to make this very clear right now. Here's the deal. The amount of money that was spent
That's all we're talking
specifically in the Jewish community by the pro-Israel super PACs was to paint the picture to all Jewish people that Nina is somehow an anti-Semite and she is going to hurt our people. Now, whether or not you want to get into the minutia about whether this is a wealthy area or not, Jen, could you please explain that?
Beechwood is pretty affluent. I mean, my husband's family is from there. There's regular people that aren't really wealthy there, but for the most part, this is a pretty privileged area outside of Cleveland. And it just is. It's pretty privileged.
And now, and on the flip side of what you said, Elvira, and I do agree with you, we don't know the full details yet.
That's another
story.
But
our understanding as of right now is that the Jewish vote is what decided this election. And from all accounts, the Jewish vote went overwhelmingly to Chantel Brown.
And we never know. You never know with elections the exact reason why people vote. We can't say, oh, they saw that ad and went and voted the way they did. We can't.
No.
You look at what the things are that are correlated and you try to do the best you can to understand where people are thinking. But the reality is that the pro-Israel lobby, the Democrat, which one is it? It's the Democrat. It's not AIPAC. It's a Democrat.
Democracy for Israel or something.
That PAC spent millions and millions of dollars to beat Nina Turner. And
almost 3 million was my understanding.
And they're really trying to paint her as anti-Semitic. And this has been going on, not just with Nina. This has been going on for so long as such a tool of the establishment. They use the Jews to basically squash any progress by using the anti-Semitic card. And the problem with this is there is real anti-Semitism. All the time, every day, more and more. I don't dispute that.
And we talked about at the beginning of the podcast how Debbie's reaction to Nina losing and the use of language that she implored.
She virtue signaled to the Jewish community.
But by doing it the way that she did, that invokes anti-Semitism.
And you know what it invokes even more? My wrath.
There you go.
So I really resent immensely. And I am obviously I'm a very, very secular person. But I was raised Jewish. I know probably more than most secular Jews would know, okay, about these things. And the fact that she's trying to basically, I feel like we shouldn't own her as a Jew. I do not like the way that she's referring to the crushing of vulnerable working people as a mitzvah. And I think that's just so It's disgusting. And it's like, and you always say this is the kind of thing that creates anti-Semitism.
Well, it's not just that. It's the fact that it's
fans the flames.
And again, that's the message that we put on social media today, because it's a perfect transition to the other Debbie story, which is not getting any attention.
Yes.
And it's a pretty serious one.
Yeah,
you know, Debbie comes out and is projecting herself as Chantel was the mitzvah. It was a mitzvah to support her, as if to suggest that supporting the corporate funded this goes back to biblical times.
Is a religious duty.
No, it's actually not. Supporting the candidate who takes the shekels from the banksters, that is not a mitzvah. That is a sin. That is considered blasphemy in the Holy Bible. You are not supposed to do that. This goes to the Old Testament Jewish Bible and the New Testament Catholic Bible.
But yet Debbie will use that to virtue signal to her Jewish base that she's got it. And
if you want to talk about the banksters' corruption,
yes,
Debbie Wasserman Schultz, among two other, and of course it's the Democrats, because there's only three of them. We all know what the GOP's up to. But the fact that there's only 3 current Democrats under investigation for violating the Stock Act, which is insider trading. Of course, Debbie's one of them.
Always. If there is something where there's a group of people up to no good and there's only a few Democrats, she's always one of them.
Always.
Yep. That, as we were just saying with Medea, she's the one who takes all the money from the pro-Cuba PAC.
And I know that there are people in this district, especially older voters, who think it's hyperbolic. You just want to get Debbie out. You have an issue with her. I am telling you, if you really look, and we're not going to get into the full details, but we'll just say that after the election, we came home and we started dissecting where a lot of her money comes from.
It's worse than I thought. But
even worse than you would think. I mean, we always say she's open for business, but my goodness, when you look at this, and again, when a story like this comes out, that she very likely violated the Stock Act, there's 2 things to consider here. Number 1, it's not surprising. And number 2, this is just a short while after several senators were caught violating it.
But I just think my problem with this is that I don't want to harp on this too much. And you know that, because I feel like, again, this is one of those things that, and I'm not saying it's okay, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't go after it, but to harp on this with her, it really, to me, smells like going after Al Capone for tax evasion. It's like, first of all, insider trading is something they all do. They do. And I'm not saying it's okay, but they do. So to single her out for this, when there are so many more disgusting and egregious things that she has done, just seems kind of like it's very low hanging fruit.
It is, but it just perfectly ties into the duality and the hypocrisy of the way she conducts herself. And so
Debbie, let me ask you something though. Is it a mitzvah when you do insider trading? When you find out things and use it to your advantage and screw other people, is that a mitzvah?
Honestly, I think I hate having to say this, but honestly, I think she's a sociopath. I really do. I think she is devoid of empathy, and the way that she is so duplicitous in everything she does, it's just. I mean, look, a lot of our elected representatives are bought and paid for by corporate special interests.
It's true.
But she is on a whole other
level.
Guys,
if you ever get a chance, really seriously, is. And if you ever go and look at opensecrets.org, it's a great place to go for people who are interested in, you can track where your Congress people get all their money, and you can get very specific. You could get down to companies, you could get to which PACs, which different, and you could look at it so many different ways.
The most nefarious.
If you ever get an opportunity, go look at Debbie Wasserman Schultz Open Secrets. It's like
it's a who's who.
It's a who's who of the most nefarious actors in our country that are trying to keep people down. And those are the people that she takes the money from. And none of them are good guys. Like every single industry, whether it's big agri, big pharma,
just big sugar alone.
She $60,000
in one
election cycle from big sugar. It's just crazy.
But just remember, they wouldn't spend that money if they didn't get what they wanted out of it.
Well, They're right. They're not paying for nothing.
That's right.
So all right, we got to move on from her. But meanwhile, in the criminal underground, we have more stories.
We have one last story to cover tonight.
And I don't know if people can see the graphics.
Like, I don't know how well they can
see. If you guys can see this graphic, this cracked him up when I made this last night.
But the Cuomo
brothers,
the Cuomooni crime family. You know, a lot of people always wanted, for those people, again, this is probably way before your time, but I was told the story.
I love it when you say that and I'm sitting here.
Yeah, no, I know. But in 1984, and I believe also in 1988, the Democratic Party wanted Mario Cuomo to run for president. Now, I've always been told that the reason why Mario never ran for president is because he had way too many skeletons in his closet.
I would believe that.
Now,
And he was a good guy. He was relatively, I mean, he was
comparative to
correct.
what his sons
Right.
ultimately became.
Well, Mario Cuomo was very, very loved and
he
very,
was.
very revered.
And he was actually very progressive in a lot of ways.
he also really got along with people on both sides of the aisle.
did.
He really did.
He did.
So,
But unfortunately, a lot of people like to harp on what they see with the Trump family kids. Well,
talk about the
let me
Cuomo boys.
assure you that the Cuomo boys are just as bad, if
So-
not worse, because they have a lot more power and they are much more heavily protected by the powers that be. So not only was Andrew Cuomo sexually harassing and assaulting numerous women, at least 11 that we know of, but his brother was running cover for him.
So I don't know if people can see it, but I have superimposed Michael and Fredo Corleone's faces on the Cuomo brothers. And I do that because if this ever does get back to Chris Cuomo, I really want him to know that I think he is Fredo to the nth degree.
And he really is
Fredo.
now, because it's amazing how we always say the arc of morality is slow, but it bends towards justice. And in this case, it really does, because you remember how vitriolic and overreactive he got when somebody called him Fredo. But his actions, no pun intended, is very much like Fredo.
Well, first of all, something that, and anybody who knows me knows this, that if you tell me that someone doesn't like something, it just makes me want to do it more. Like, it just makes it more fun. Like, if he didn't mind being called Fredo, then I wouldn't have done this. This wouldn't be fun. So this is for you, Chris Cuomo.
And because he was just such a yes man, and he was aiding and abetting essentially his brother,
who's apparently a sexual predator. And
on top of everything else, because as bad as his sexual perversion is,
the bigger issue,
murdering grandma and grandpa.
How many? It was like 11,000.
No, like 16,000.
16,000 people.
Like
look, I want to also comment on the clip that I saw from Andrew Cuomo's what should have been a deferential apology and begging for people to have pity on him.
I told you, he wants to be a martyr.
Oh, he's doubling down. So he actually then puts together footage of all of the inappropriate ways he's touched numerous people, as if to say, look, I touch everybody inappropriately.
But then who did he show was also touching people inappropriately? The president of the United States.
Well, that's the other thing. So what I find interesting, so then there was a press conference and they were asking Joe Biden his thoughts on what Cuomo should do. Oh, he should resign. And I'm thinking, so we have Joe Biden, who's a predator, commenting on a governor who's a predator, that he should resign. The hypocrisy is suffocating.
This is why the Cuomo story is very, very interesting, because he is really one of the most powerful politicians in the country. He really is. But this is a big club and you ain't in it. And when a high-ranking member of Sands Club is basically being kicked out, they're not going out quietly.
No, they're going to take others with them.
They are. And that's the thing about Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
It always comes back. This is why Jordan thinks you're like obsessed with hating.
But I still maintain that the reason why she stays where she stays is because she is in that club and she knows everybody's dirty laundry.
Well, and I also think she knows that once she's never getting back in.
That's very true as well. But also, they all protect each other. And so when Cuomo has basically been cast out, if you will, he's like, oh, okay, that's how you want to play it? I'll unleash it all on everybody.
He's disgusting. He disgusts me. He's filthy, disgusting. First of all, I never doubted Lindsey Boylan's story for a second. Not for a second.
Neither did I.
And I also know, again, as I've always said, I don't know a single adult woman that has not been violated. I have no reason to not believe anybody. And quite honestly, his reaction to it spoke more than even the whole original part of it. The whole thing is disgusting. He is a filth. And the other thing about him and Biden, it's not a sex thing.
That's power.
It's this entitlement, entitlement that you're just entitled to put your hands up. I mean, even with Lucy Flores and Joe Biden, and I go back to this, to me, that set me off more than anything. And he came up, he put his hands on her shoulders. He smelled her hair. He sniffed her hair.
Look, man. I mean, he just ran out of options. He doesn't have any choice. But Let me
Gross. So, and let me tell you something. Anybody who feels entitled to go up to a grown woman, put hands on said woman, kiss her head, oh, forget it. I would have. Let me tell you something. You're lucky. You want to know, man? You're lucky that wasn't me. That's all I can say.
It's just.
Oh my God.
It's a nice way of saying hello. I'm Joe Biden. I'm the president, man.
We know.
We got to get rid of that Cuomo guy. He just ain't cutting it anymore.
Yeah, he's going to take you with him, Joe.
Oh, he ain't taking me anywhere. I'm protected.
Yeah.
Really protected. Got it?
Yeah, I get it.
But again, he just made a mistake.
Yeah,
Big
that's
mistake.
what he did.
He wasn't touching the kids.
No, that's your job, Joe.
Oh, we're not talking about that.
No. Tell me about your hairy legs, Joe.
I got really hairy legs.
I know when it gets wet.
When it
I know.
gets
I've
wet
heard your
and
whole story.
Hey, they turn blonde in the sun.
Yeah, I've heard all about
Really
your hairy
blonde in the
legs.
sun. And they feel great, man. They feel great. Have you seen all the great things we've done lately? I mean, we're making America great again.
That was not your slogan.
It wasn't?
No.
Oh, damn it. Well, maybe I got to go back to sleep. I'm getting a little tired.
I think you know what honestly, what this mask looks like is what Joe would look like if they just taped his eyes open.
Maybe. But I'm kind of tired.
You're always tired. You're
I've been
sleepy.
working-
Look,
I've been working
creepy,
really hard.
Uncle Joe. I think it should be sleepy creepy. Stop.
No, I'm-
So gross.
but I can't help
Just
I
stop.
can't help myself, man. You're such a lovely lady. Isn't she a lovely lady, guys? Isn't she?
I feel like when you do this, you really be them and it grosses me out. That's why I only like it when you're Bernie. Bernie's the only one that I don't mind sitting next to that I'm not kind of creeped out by.
Well, Bernie's a good friend, but he just does what I tell him.
Yeah, you treat Bernie like crap, Joe.
No, I don't.
Yeah, you do.
No, I don't.
All right, go away, Joe. Go, Joe.
So I really do appreciate you all. We really appreciate you all. coming out
Definitely. You
tonight.
guys, if you're not Patreons and you would be interested in becoming a Patreon, we would really appreciate it.
We do.
We do. It's something that really is just, we're using it to just keep this going. We love to be interviewing people. We really do. I mean, yeah, we joke and have fun and we do make fun of like political tools. But really what we are mostly about is getting really substantive information about a wide variety of things that we think are important to people. So whether it's having an update on Cuba from Medea or meeting Mark Charles and talking about, First Peoples and that, it's like, these are things that are really important that we're not getting anywhere else.
Very
So
much.
this is what we're trying to do. So if you guys would be so inclined, please be a Patreon. I always say, I say Patreon,
Patron.
but it's patrons on Patreon and subscribers. And for people that have subscribed in the past couple of weeks, I have not forgotten you. We're getting ready to do a shipment.
Look at this beautiful little sticker.
It's the Lulu.
It's a beautiful sticker.
It's Lulu.
You know,
You
want
guys
it.
get the Lulu. And if guys watching, I have a little package to send you too, because I'm going to send you your sticker and a bracelet as well, because he upped his nice membership. He is our one and only $25 Patreon, which we didn't always have that category.
Use
so
more of
in
that.
fairness, yeah. But anyway, $5-10 is so helpful, guys. Like we were able to try to go to Cleveland to be there except for when we wanted to. We got there, but we really are using money to really grow this movement and build progressive
And just
ideas.
the trip, the trip going to Cleveland obviously was thanks to your help. And Jen was obviously able to make some really great connections there. Finally was able to meet Amy Villela in person and
Jason Call.
And
But this is
you
our
know,
network. These are the people.
Yeah.
This is the movement. These people. And so the more that group of people kind of comes together and builds on that and brainstorms and has ideas and strategizes and learns from the campaigns that don't work and learns what do work. Fighting like Sisyphus, pushing a ball up a hill. And so every little bit helps. And really every campaign brings us one step closer. So
it does.
That's what we're really trying to do here. And by the way, speaking of what's coming up campaign-wise, November 2nd,
there is going to be
I don't have my
another
calendar is the
special
problem.
election, only this time it's here in South Florida, Florida's 20th Congressional District, which covers the top end. I can't even
name.
describe it.
Wait, it's in
No.
okay.
I can't describe the way this district looks, but let's just say it's gerrymandering to the hilt. And there are a couple of amazing progressive candidates that are running in this race. We do think that Sheila McCormick, between Sheila McCormick and Omari Hardy, Sheila McCormick has a really excellent chance to win this race because she happens to have the most money in this race. And guess what? She's primarily self-funded.
Yes. And that, of course, doesn't sit right with people who can't fathom how could a 42-year-old Black woman have money?
Yeah, really. How could she? Maybe that's the white supremacy and
Maybe that
racism
is.
of our Debbie sycophant journalist, who we not name.
We don't need not name him. But I wanted to say, like, and I do like Omari, and I don't have a real problem with Omari. I really don't. This isn't about that. But
He's a good guy.
and the truth is,
Very
I'm
right.
not saying that I wouldn't support him. But I do definitely
But we
support
could
Sheila.
really, really use this seat.
And we could really, if we were to really get behind Sheila for the November 2nd election, I think that would be a really, that's our next focus,
Put it this
guys.
way. If you really want to guarantee that Jen is going to run again, having that person
It's
running
just
having that connection in Broward would be
huge.
unbelievably huge.
Huge.
And I still maintain that the only reason why that a smear ad was written against her in the Sun Sentinel is because she is a threat. If she wasn't a threat, they'd have no reason to write.
And they didn't mention her in the other article about the other candidates. So
Correct.
guys, check out Sheila Sherfilis McCormick. She is running in the 20th. Down here, we're going to be doing everything we can to motivate and get out for votes for Sheila. And again, I'm not anti-Amari Hardy in any way, shape, or form.
No, but you know what? Once we found out exactly how much money Sheila is sitting on, there is no way that you can't support her. She has the funds to do this.
Right. It's the most viable. We have to think strategy. You have to think strategy.
And when you consider who she's going up against, and because it's a crowded field, it's all the more reason why we should get behind
And
Sheila.
let me be very clear. This is not a support the lesser of two evils because she has the money.
No.
Sheila, in addition to being brilliant, because she's extremely smart about lots of different things, almost bordering on wonky. And I can't tell you someone who would be actually a better congressional representative for down
this
here.
particular district.
I really
anyway.
can't.
She
She's
really
great.
puts in the work there. Again, we've
It's
done
true.
a podcast with her. We highly recommend you check
And
it
we
out.
are going, and we are planning. This is something else that we are planning.
a debate.
I'm not calling it a debate.
Or a panel.
I'm calling it a candidate roundtable.
All right, I'll do that.
Okay. On September 27th, guys, our Monday night is going to be a seat 20 congressional roundtable. We are going to invite all of the candidates, or at least I think the six, right? The top six candidates that are running for seat 20. We're going to invite all of them to come on here, and we're going to see who comes, and we're going to see who shows up or who even responds. Obviously people might have something, but if at least they would respond saying, "Oh, I wish I could come. Could you?" That would go a long way, because I would absolutely mention that and put that out, that it wasn't being ignored.
And if you think we had a great show tonight, Monday night is an even bigger deal.
Monday night, guys.
So we've got two amazing guests that are going to be coming on. The first one is going to be Carol Roth, author of The War on Small Business. Now, Carol is definitely on the political right, but a lot of what she talks about in the book is correct. Unfortunately, some of her conclusions are incorrect.
And that's
discussing
neither here nor there. We like to talk about different things. So she tends to be more on the Fox News type of segments.
Well, Fox Business,
sorry. And so whatever.
She was on Tim Pool.
Okay. So, but the point is like, we like to bring in different ideas, and we are definitely big supporters of small business. And so the more we can know about that and the more we can do for that is good. And then our second guest
is going to be Jacob Allen, who is the VP of
Vice Chair.
Excuse me. Don't say Vice P. He is the Vice Chair of the Nevada Dems, the new Nevada Dems.
And this is what we really need to be.
The non-corporate Nevada Dems.
And this is something that we were talking about when you were saying how people in that room weren't sad that we were angry. Oh, we were angry. And you had people like, I had Jason Call come up to me and basically be like, okay, we got to talk about what we're going to do now. Like what's the strategy? And I really do believe that what they did in Nevada is the strategy. And that's what we really need to work on. And what we want to be doing is basically building a coalition. Don't do that right now. We're going to be building a coalition, and I would love it. And you guys, if you know people that would be interested in like working in this, I want somebody in every single state. We need somebody in every single state, or at least every state that has a Democratic Party. There might be states that don't even have one. I don't know. But every state that has a functioning Democratic Party, we would like Generational Change would like a representative to like be part of our coalition from that state. And we want to start building a coalition. So anybody, whatever state you're in, if you're interested in working with us as a coalition to try to do this sort of takeover a la Nevada of the state parties, because that's the only way we're getting anywhere.
Yes.
Because what also killed Nina is the machine.
Oh, yes.
And the machine is something that we can take over, as evidenced in Nevada. And most people don't even realize it. Most people are sitting around and bitching about the party, but they haven't done anything to actually work in the party. You have to work it. You have to work the levers of the state party.
And you got to put in work. It's not a question of, oh, we're infiltrating. No, you actually have to put in work.
And so we want, if you're interested in working with us on this, if you're interested in being sort of a generational change, sort of liaison to your Democratic state party takeover, I really want to see what we can do with this. I want to start having, we could have meetings. We could start talking about what we're doing in different parts of the states to really work through the counties. But this is where this has to happen. Also, by the way, side note, Amy Vilela is running again. So be looking out for that. That's not until 22.
We will be going to Vegas at some point, though.
Vegas.
That'll be fun. But it's it's work. It's work. And maybe a little play.
Okay, but it doesn't hurt that it's there and not somewhere less desirable.
That shouldn't be too difficult to get people to go there to help her win on top of everything else.
So we will most likely be coming out there to help Amy. And so that's what we have coming up. And then October 15th, general strike. We're planning an action here. We're going to be doing it via organizing labor.
Yes.
We do not have unrealistic expectations that we're actually going to be able to initiate a real strike, a real walkout here. Florida is a right to work state. That's not necessarily something that's doable. However, that isn't to say that we can't do a complete walkout of spending, a blackout of spending. So we're going to be promoting a no spending day, October 15th. We're going to try to put together at least one type of rally. I mean, obviously I want to do one in Broward because that makes my life easier than doing Dade. Sure. But some sort of movement, get labor out in the streets talking, and certainly people that don't have to risk their jobs to do so. I mean, we realize where we live. It's not reasonable to expect that. But so October 15th, it's a general strike day, guys. You should put it on your calendar.
Yes, please do that.
And that's that.
Guys, thank you as always.
When are we going to get Bernie on?
Fine.
You guys want Bernie?
Well, look, I wasn't going to come on tonight because I think a lot of people are still upset, but I want to know if everybody's optimistic about the future.
We're sad about Nina.
We're
really upset about Nina.
We're very upset. We're very upset about Nina. Nina should have been there. She should be on Capitol Hill.
Maybe explain that she maybe could be in 8 months.
Look, maybe in 8 months. I'm getting used to the hand.
Yeah, but you're doing it when he's not really adamant. You got to do it when he's really adamant.
I am really adamant about the fact that Nina Turner should have been on Capitol Hill right now. But Cori Bush, she did an amazing job. Amazing job.
When do we get to choose again in that Ohio race? Because from my understanding, Chantel's really only there for 8 months.
Well, look, I think there's a good opportunity that Nina might run again. I mean, if the primary is in April of 2020.
That's what I want people to know. That's the message I'm giving, is that, guys, remember, this was a special election. That seat is up again in April.
Don't deny the fact that Nina Turner is definitely an amazing woman, and she should be there right now.
Oh, yeah.
She definitely should be, and it is unfortunate that election turned out the way that it did. I feel terrible about everyone who put in so much work and time, and they really wanted to see Nina win, and Lord knows I am as upset as anybody. She really is a fantastic person and would have made a fantastic representative.
I know.
And that Debbie Wasserman Schultz,
I know,
making a bad, stink of it like she always does. It really is unfortunate that she thought it would be a good idea.
She really can't help herself, can
No, she really can't, and that is why I don't deal with her. I really don't, and like you said, you don't claim her. Well, I don't claim her. And we definitely don't claim her.
But could you believe she said that was a mitzvah?
Well, you know what a mitzvah would be? Well, getting you elected one day. That would be
Thank you, Bernie.
So with that said, guys, stay optimistic. Believe in what the possibilities of tomorrow could bring. Stay in the fight. Be good people. We love you all. And we'll see you soon.
So about the ethics probe into Brown. Yeah. So somebody's asking. Yeah, that is interesting. And hopefully by April, there'll be a lot more information on that, because there are a few things about her that stink to high heaven.
That is true, which is why I don't think this is over yet.
No.
And the way that Nina,
I mean, it is for this election. We're not saying that this isn't.
But the way that Nina came off was to suggest that she's going to keep those options on the table, but the possibility of running a second time, I do think is very possible.
And I will tell you what also is definitely possible, whether or not she chooses to run again. She is so hell bent on backing all the non-corporate candidates. These people think that they kept Nina out of Congress. It is to your own detriment, my friends.
Yeah.
You have no
you might have
idea
been better. You might have been better off with her winning
in Congress, because then
saying.
you'd have a little bit more control of the situation. I got to tell you, hell hath no fury, man.
Not with her.
And that she is pissed. And I'm just saying, I think you all would have been safer with her in Congress. That's just my personal opinion. But she is making it her mission to be fighting for everybody else who is running. And let me tell you, if you've ever heard Nina speak, it's palpable.
It really is. It's the best there is. She is the best of
She's
us.
the best.
So we'll see you guys Monday. Have a great weekend and be well.